This story began in the dungeon of one of the estates of the Marquis Ivantes, who was a famous magician. Our heroine's name was Rosie Gertas, but she herself did not know that she belonged to an aristocratic family. The girl had only recently entered the body of a servant, so she remembered little about this world. But she was certain that the powerful magician Richard Marm could not be trusted. The ladies were warned that Marquis Argin Ivantes had not locked this man in prison for no reason, and now the guy grabbed the girl's hand so hard that she had no chance to escape. At that moment, the heroine did not yet suspect that she had a healing magical ability, so it was a surprise to her that Richard felt better in her presence, despite the heat from the magic. Rosie had planned a quiet and peaceful life, without any adventures or obstacles, but closeness with Marm dictated other conditions, since the guy could no longer live without her. Only next to the girl did he feel better, as the pain from the energy inside him receded. Out of pity, the heroine could not abandon the guy who had been treated so cruelly by the aristocrats. She saw that Richard needed her, and so she stayed close at the most important moments. Although Rosie herself would have preferred to run away from this magician, who could be dangerous for her. But in the end, the girl didn't even notice how she fell into his nets, which were cunningly set from the very beginning. Her rebirth occurred quite recently, and the lady found herself in the estate of the Marquis of Avantes. At first, the heroine didn't even understand what exactly had happened to her, because she had just been in her own world, and now her appearance was radically different from before, and the place was not like her world. As soon as the girl started thinking, her faithful friend Emily immediately brought her to her senses. They were servants in the estate, and they were not allowed to shirk their work even for a second. It turned out that it was Rosie's turn to feed the monster, and she didn't even remember it. The heroine barely had time to realize what was happening, as events around her were rapidly changing. And now she is forced to carry food into the dungeon in the hope that the monster will not be scary. If only the girl had retained the memories of the body's owner, everything would have been simpler. And so she had to figure out from scratch why some beast was locked in a cold dungeon. Rosie was still worried, and now she couldn't even remember her real last name. As she was ordered, the lady planned to quickly leave the food inside the dungeon and escape. Cold sweat covered her body from fear, but Rosie did not dare to resist the task set before her. It would seem so easy to leave a plate of food on the floor and run away before you get caught. But deep down, the girl felt that she couldn't cope with the mission, even though she tried her best. A warm male hand stopped her from running away, and the heroine discovered that the man in front of her was just an ordinary guy. He was obviously in a bad state and begged the lady to give him some valuable medicine. Until now, Rosie knew so little about this world that she did not understand what exactly was being discussed. The girl froze in surprise, as life had not prepared her for such situations. The unknown guy didn't look dangerous, still begging for the life-saving elixir. Only at this moment did Gertas begin to remember that in a past life, she had read something about such events. This guy reminded her of Richard Marm, who was a powerful magician in one of the novels. As he said, the lady found a small bottle of medicine in the pocket of her clothes. At that moment, she did not yet know that this potion relieved the young man of pain due to the enormous magic inside him. Only Emily's sudden appearance saved the heroine from making a mistake, because the medicine could not be given. The red-haired maid remembered the Marquis's instructions well, so she forbade her friend from doing anything like that. But the pity inside Rosie was stronger than any orders from a man she couldn't see. In her past life, the girl often helped other people, and now she could not do otherwise. It was obvious from Richard's expression how much pain he was in, but no one rushed to help him. So it was the lady who became the person who showed compassion for the first time in a long time. If only Gertas had known what consequences this action would lead to, she would have thought twice. However, at that time, she was driven only by the desire to help, because the poor guy needed help. And in the end, everything led to the fact that Marm no longer wanted to let go of the kind girl. It was only when they left the dungeon that Emily expressed all her dissatisfaction to her friend. None of the maids were allowed to be charmed by that guy, no matter how handsome he was. Rosie had no response to her friend's attacks, as she had little understanding of this world. The girl still couldn't understand why everyone around her called that young man a real monster. But it was clear that he was quickly attracting the maids to himself, which was why everyone else was so worried. She remembered that Richard was constantly in pain because there was too much magic inside him. That is why Argianivantes was able to imprison this powerful wizard. From then on, he was kept in restraints constantly and only occasionally given pain medication. Emily remembered the rules well and wished Rosie wouldn't break them out of kindness. Now the heroine was in the service of the Marquis, about whom there was nothing good in the novel. It took the lady a long time to realize that she had indeed entered the book world. Until now, Gertas couldn't understand how she could have gotten into such a mess. But the next morning, everything that happened turned out to be no ordinary dream, since the miss was in the estate. Rosie was not happy with this turn of events, as she never wanted to be a servant, but she had to play by the rules of the world in which she somehow miraculously found herself not long ago. Most of all, the lady was afraid that Richard would like her and become his personal assistant. In the novel, such ladies were punished by death if Marm tried to escape from prison, even without help. That's why she was going to stay as far away from Marm as possible, who was dangerous for her. But the guy's sweet smile disarmed the girl from the very beginning, who was weak to beauty. Rosie wasn't prepared for the scary magician to be so sweet and attractive. But Emily warned the girl that it was not for nothing that Richard was called a monster and a beast. As a result, from the very beginning, the lady bought the magician's words that he had been thinking about her kindness all night. The young man acted so kindly, as if he had no plans to escape from the estate after killing a bunch of people. But the heroine remembered that, in the novel, this man remained merciless even to the weakest. Richard was one of the most evil characters in history. So many were right to fear him. During his short life, he killed a huge number of people and stopped at nothing. And now he was so kind to the lady only because she could give him a saving medicine for the pain. So Rosie didn't have any hope that the guy would be kind to her if she got closer to him. As soon as Marmu finished eating, he allowed the maid to return to her work at the estate. The heroine breathed a sigh of relief, as she thought that this man did not like her. But the girl's heart sank with fear when Richard suddenly approached her. The guy was clearly interested in the lady who had been so kind to him from the very beginning. What scared Rosie most was that the magician had so easily broken the magic chains on his legs, so nothing could stop him from escaping, although Marm was in no hurry to leave the estate. Instead, he approached the young maid who had caught his attention with her actions. The heroine was taken by surprise and dropped the tray on which she had brought food for the guy in the dungeon. But Richard was so interested in her scent that he was unable to think of anything else. If Rosie hadn't pretended to feel ill, nothing would have been able to save the girl. She could only hope that Marm would feel sympathy and release her from prison. Surprisingly, the young man believed the lady's lie, although it was clear that she was simply trying to escape. Rosie was glad that her acting had been enough to deceive her, and now she was free. All the lady's thoughts were filled with escape, since she was afraid to stay near Richard. She was absolutely sure that the magical shackles could not break just like that. The heroine was not one to remain silent in such a situation, so she went for help. Luckily, the lady quickly found a man in the estate who looked like a butler. If only Gertas knew that she wasn't actually calling for help from the estate's butler. In front of her stood a very handsome guy, whose expression remained arrogant. At the sight of him, the lady even forgot that she wanted to tell something important about the prisoner. The eyes of the unknown young man seemed to pierce her right through, and there was not a hint of friendliness in them. At that moment, Rosie did not recognize this man as the same Marquis Argianivantes. She was so preoccupied with the broken chains in the dungeon that logic completely shut down. Gertas was so nervous she couldn't find the words right away, but she still told him about the information she had obtained. The handsome guy became interested in the incident, which could lead to the monster's escape. Only now did the heroine remember that the stranger's appearance reminded her of the owner of the estate. The realization filled all the thoughts of the girl who had behaved so carelessly with other people with fear. Argan was known for his cruelty and cold-bloodedness towards those who did not respect his status. But this time, this attentive servant seemed useful to the Marquis, so he smiled at her. But Rosie was afraid of any attention, so she didn't want to become special to anyone. She had not yet had time to understand that it was too late to justify herself, because Argan had already liked her. Avantes had never met a girl before who wasn't afraid to look him straight in the eyes. The heroine had barely appeared in this world when she already earned herself a bunch of problems due to ignorance. The future seemed foggy and unpleasant, and yet Rosie had tried so hard to remain quiet. The next morning was just as full of anxiety and disappointment, as the lady did not return to her world. so she had to go to Richard again, since it was her turn to take him food. Miss had only a few days left before another assistant would take over from her in this matter. But she didn't expect to see Marm in such bad shape this morning. A terrible guess pierced the lady, because it was on her tip that Argan applied punishment to the magician. Rosie had no doubt that Avantes had not forgiven Richard for breaking the shackles. The result was that the guy could now barely move or speak, although he continued to smile. The realization of guilt could not let go of the heroine, who did not wish such pain for the monster. She still wanted to live quietly and peacefully, but after what she saw, she could not stay away. So this time, Rosie decided to take care of Marma, because no one else cared about him. If the lady hurries, she will have time to get some ice to ease Richard's pain. Who would have thought that on the way the miss would run into another late maid? Gertus immediately remembered the girl's face. Although they had never seen each other on the estate grounds before, she might have seemed beautiful to anyone, but Rosie was not deceived by her assistant's sweet appearance. It was this lady who constantly mixed fruit into the magician's food, which was not intended for humans. In ancient times, this fruit was used for torture, as many people went mad under its influence. This element could cause an incredible appetite in a person who ate it for a long time. Another side effect was a huge sexual attraction to any person nearby. The problem was that this fruit gave Richard an unbearable desire to kill. The heroine did not know the maid's goals, but she understood that she needed to thwart her dangerous plans. Marm was so strong that he could easily harm Rosie, despite all her kindness. Moreover, if, due to Lady Richard's fault, she had managed to escape, she would have been punished by Argan. That's why Miss had no choice but to personally supervise the preparation of the food. The girl was determined to replace the maid who mixed the fruit into the food. Only Gertas had the power to ensure that the magician no longer suffered from the unpleasant drug. So she deliberately pushed that maid, resulting in that girl getting injured. Of course, the lady did not want her assistant to get hurt, but now she had achieved her goal. The cook needed help, so the man could not refuse, although another maid came to him. That's how easily and simply the heroine got a job in the kitchen, which could have saved Richard. That's why Gertas was so happy, despite the fact that her responsibilities had now increased. Due to the lying maid's injury, the entire kitchen was now under Rosie's watchful eye, and she was not going to miss a single poison, lest madness accidentally overtake Richard. For the first time in a long time, calm overtook the girl, who could not forget about her anxiety. In the end, the chef praised the new assistant's work so highly that he treated her to his signature dessert. The man didn't expect the lady to agree to try, although for him, it was a matter of principle. But Gertas remembered that she needed a good relationship with the chef, so she accepted the dessert. She was only too happy to bring Richard some new food, because he hadn't eaten properly for a long time. No matter what kind of monster this magician was branded as, the lady felt pity and sympathy for him. The only thing that worried the heroine was that there were some things in this estate that she couldn't fix. It was about a sectarian group of demon worshippers who were dangerous and cruel people. It was them that Rosie planned to find in the near future, even if she couldn't resist. This group had been gradually taking over the empire for a long time, attracting new followers. They were distinguished by the fact that they indiscriminately offered human sacrifices to demonic beings. The sectarians were ready to kill anyone who believed in God and intended to oppose their actions. But for now, the heroine had to think only about the guy who was locked in the Marcus's estate. Of course, Rosie had no right to help Richard escape, because she would have been severely punished for it. But it was within her power to alleviate the condition of Marm, who was already suffering too much. The guards, as usual, pretended not to notice the pain of the prisoner, about whom they didn't care. So in the entire estate, the heroine was the only person who sincerely helped the magician. That's why the lady brought him such delicious food, which Richard hadn't eaten for a long time. The guy was noticeably surprised to see a normal dish, and not some semblance of rice. Rosie's tone became gentle and ingratiating, as she did not want to die at the hands of this man. But Marmu felt that the girl was plotting something unkind towards him. Argan could very well have ordered the maid to harm the mage while he trustingly ate her food. And the guy honestly admitted that he had no reason to treat his assistant well. However, this did not upset Rosie, who believed that no one would know about her little help. The girl tried so hard, not only because she wanted to survive in the estate at any cost. Richard had nothing to say in response to the care that emanated from the girl in great quantity, So he made the right decision when he started eating the food before it got completely cold. For the first time in a long time, the boy felt real gratitude towards someone from the estate. Rosie acted as if she had done nothing special to the prisoner. Marm immediately felt the difference, because the taste of the food was very different from his usual diet. Usually, some kind of drug, which was called medicine, was mixed into the guy's food. The maid didn't put anything like that in, so the magician enjoyed the real taste of the soup. This only further surprised Richard, who was used to looking for some kind of catch in everything. But Rosie acted as if she was always kind to the sick, no matter how harmful they were. At that moment, Marm caught the assistant, latching onto her words about helping those in need. The lady didn't expect the guy to get comfortable in her company so quickly and start being cheeky in response. Pride did not allow her to lie, because the miss was truly a kind person with a big heart. The heroine didn't even notice how quickly she was getting closer to the magician, whom everyone around her considered a monster. For some reason, Richard felt better around this lady, whom he had met quite recently. His mind was filled with the desire to possess the girl so that she could not run away to anyone. But Marm understood perfectly well that the lady would quickly run away from him if he frightened her even once. So he planned to pretend to be sick so that Rosie wouldn't be able to leave him alone in the dungeon. Before leaving, Gertas remembered the question of the young man who had once asked about her perfume. This matter still interested Richard, because he sensed some pleasant aroma coming from the girl. But the heroine had no idea whether the real Rosie used any perfume. However, Marm was sure that the lady was constantly emitting the scent of her own body. Any girl would be upset to hear about something like this, because they always took care of cleanliness. So Gertas could only hope that the guard hadn't heard that part of their conversation. Only now did one of the assistants, named Marie, learn that Marm had not received the drug. Lucy had been trying to slip something into his throughout the day, but because of Rosie, she couldn't. But Marie had so carefully thought out the ways in which she would slowly poison Richard. And in the end, the impudent pink-haired maid ruined everything in just one miserable day. Marie had the most complaints about Lucy, but she did not want to lose her obedient attitude. It turned out that the problems did not end there, because the assistant did not have access to the kitchen. No matter what Lucy did, Rosie was able to get permission to cook for the monster on her own. The girl said she was ready to watch the chef in action for centuries, and it worked flawlessly. Of course, the heroine did not fall in love with the mentor at all, but she simply needed to cook food. Even in her past life, Rosie realized that flattery was the best way to solve many problems. That's why she was in such a good mood, which didn't escape the attentive Emily, while the maid herself was worried about the news that was currently circulating in the estate. She learned that Count Gertas was looking for his sister, who had disappeared several years ago. The heroine did not immediately remember this surname, which belonged to a famous aristocrat. In Yurt's novel, Gertas was one of the main villains, and at the same time, he opposed the skillful Richard. What surprised Emily most was that the Count only began searching for his beloved sister after some time. But Rosie was wary because her appearance matched the description perfectly. The girl couldn't even imagine that she really was a relative of that terrible man. But for a long time, the friends were unable to discuss this news, as someone suddenly intervened in their conversation. Usually, the other maids left Emily and Rosie alone, but something was clearly wrong today. The assistants approached in a small group, as they clearly needed each other's support. The heroine became noticeably wary, as she had no reason to communicate with the other maids. It turned out that these ladies wanted to help with cooking for the monster, although this had never happened before. Rosie had worked so hard to get her place in the kitchen that she wasn't about to give it up so quickly. The girls clearly did not expect to be refused, as they wanted to make the young assistants' work easier. However, Gertas remembered that nothing good could ever be expected from the other maids. Even Emily agreed that these girls were acting surprisingly suspicious. But at this point, the friends had to part ways, as it was time for Rosie to feed the monster. Along the way, the heroine was still bothered by the maids, who were actively trying to take her place. She had never encountered help from other ladies before, so she thought it was something suspicious. But now, Miss needed to focus on not dying at the hands of the powerful Richard. But the guy again found himself in such a deplorable state that he couldn't even think about harm. His entire body was covered with even deeper wounds, although the previous ones had not even had time to heal properly. Rosie was horrified by the thought that Argan had visited the prisoner again and brought punishment with him. Marma's life was already not sweet, and now it was made even more difficult by such painful circumstances. But something about Richard's wounds persistently seemed strange to the girl, as if hinting at an answer. She didn't immediately notice that the scratches were left by some sharp object. As soon as the guess struck Gertas's mind, fear overwhelmed her, due to the unpleasant situation. No one except the prison guard wielded a whip, but Argin did not send the order for the beating, so it was unclear why the knight took on such responsibility while his master was not looking. The heroine was sure that Ivantes had remained fixated on beauty and neatness since childhood, so when he punished Richard, he left practically no serious marks on him. Therefore, Argin certainly could not have beaten the prisoner to such an extent, although he sincerely hated him. That's why Rosie had no doubt that the criminal had been nearby the whole time. The girl just didn't understand why Marm didn't even try to resist in response. At that time, she didn't yet know that the magician was deliberately provoking pain so that the lady would stay with him. His eyes seemed to Gertas to be full of the cold and raging sea, which attracted her with its beauty. The girl had the feeling that she could gaze and drown in these amazing eyes. This made Rosie's heart beat faster, but she tried not to feel anything for the guy. But he clearly enjoyed her appearance. But Marmu liked the lady's scent much more. He was attracted by this smell, which somehow miraculously brought relief from the pain. At that moment, it became clear to the heroine that she should not meet Marm outside the dungeon. Otherwise, the guy will grab her and do whatever comes into his twisted head, and Rosie won't have a single chance to escape because she doesn't know how to resist magic. This prospect did not please the girl, who dreamed of escaping and living freely and happily. She understood that the mage's mind could become clouded if he continued to receive damage. So a cunning plan arose in the lady's head that would not allow anyone to get close to Richard. Only Emily was unhappy with the situation, because the others didn't care. The maid did not believe that her friend had found such a strange way to perform her duties. Rosie had to cook today, and she resorted to Marm's help to keep the guard from touching him. Richard didn't even refuse to help, since for him, it was at least some kind of entertainment in the middle of the day. The heroine understood that everyone around her would find her strange, but she was not afraid of such a status in society. What was much more important to the girl was that the guard would no longer dare to beat the prisoner. That's why she also enlisted his help, although the knight did not want to be associated with the monster in any way. All this time, Marm acted as if he was the sweetest and safest person in the world. But the lady was not deceived by the handsome face of the magician, who in the novel mercilessly killed everyone around him. Because she knew the plot, she was immune, so Miss had an invisible advantage. Rosie felt it was her duty to look after the man no one else wanted to talk to. She was so late that Emily was ready to die on the spot from the hunger that was eating her up from the inside. As usual, the maids came to the maid's place, where everyone ate at any time of the day. Gertas immediately noticed that the atmosphere in the room had changed subtly when they arrived today. For some reason, all the assistants looked away, as if they had done something bad and were embarrassed about it. The heroine didn't expect that the whole thing would be that she and Emily would be banned from having lunch in this place. Marie controlled many maids, so she ordered them all to go against the two girls. In the past, the lady would have swallowed the insult silently, but this time she knew how to defend herself. Marie was not prepared for Rosie to protect the monster that their master brought to the estate. The heroine had so many strong arguments that no one could object to her in response. Almost all the maids took turns serving Richard, so it was impossible to blame Gertas alone for anything. Marie realized her mistake too late and was unable to maintain authority in this situation. After that incident, minor troubles began to constantly haunt Rosie at the estate. Although Emily periodically scared off all the maids, it was not enough for them to retreat. Gertas no longer doubted that Marie was behind many of the dark deeds in the estate. There was a high probability that she was the one who ordered Lucy to mix the fruit into the monster's food. This made the girl feel uneasy, because what could she do against the estate's maids? There were only a few days left until the end of the heroine's shift, but the problems were not getting any less. Even Richard acted as if he was constantly in pain during their short meetings. Until now, the lady had not realized that the guy was deliberately evoking pity and sympathy within her. Only because of her immunity to his beauty did the lady continue to maintain her calm. But trouble once again overtook Rosie at the moment when she least expected it. After another helping of food, Richard suddenly doubled over, although he should have been fine. In a panic, Gertas forgot about her own safety because she felt the desire to help the boy. She had no idea at what point one of the maids had mixed the fruit into the food. This meant that the girl's mission had failed, and she had tried so hard to make everything go well. But in the end, madness inevitably took hold of Richard, and he could no longer resist his emotions. Rosie didn't even have time to squeak before the greedy hand of a powerful magician appeared in front of her face. Despite his weakened state, the boy remained many times stronger than the young and fragile girl. Richard could no longer control himself and didn't even really understand what exactly was happening. So in a couple of seconds, Gertas found herself in a trap from which she would never be able to escape. Marm's eyes were filled with pure madness as the fruit demanded that they kill everyone around them. His mind was filled with thoughts of whether he would feel better if he killed this maid. Only the fact that Rosie was useful to Richard saved the girl from a cruel and painful death. The lady's heart beat wildly in her chest, and she was too afraid to say anything, despite being freed. The heroine's whole life flashed before her eyes, as she believed that she was about to die. But this time, the magician was able to overcome the madness that was bursting out due to the oversaturation of the drug. If it weren't for this, there would be nothing left of Gertas, and she didn't believe that she would be reborn again. The girl's head was filled with questions about when the maids had mixed something into the food. Rosie had no doubt that a war had been declared on her, and the lady could not afford to lose. It was Marie who was responsible for this incident, although her goals were still unknown. In fact, none of the maids approached the cook anymore because he was very attentive. But Marie found a way to replace the ingredients so that the fruit still entered the monster's body. She never found an answer to the question of why Rosie got involved in this matter at all. But the heroine was not one to stand aside, so she went on the attack on the poor maid. Gertas was sure that with the help of flattery, it was possible to appease absolutely any person, and Marie really did become kinder when she heard that the girl needed her advice. Rosie acted kindly so that the maid would not suspect her treachery before the right time. So Marie was delighted that Gertas asked her for protection and help, despite the enmity. This maid never refused anyone because she liked to keep people under her control. But she didn't expect Rosie to talk about the strange dream in which her food tasted unusual. The heroine skillfully lied that in her dream, she was watching her food and saw how something was added to it. It was Marie who was doing such a thing, so that her whole body broke out in a cold sweat from fear. In fact, Rosie wasn't entirely sure that the maid was behind the whole incident, but Marie's emotions told the heroine that she had suspected the right person all this time. The maid was sure that Rosie had no evidence of her guilt anyway. However, fear consumed her completely, so that the girl lost the ability to think logically. But there was nothing dangerous in Gertas's words, unless you were involved in such a thing. So Marie gave herself away with her panic, but she didn't immediately understand what mistake she had made. The heroine, who at first did not dare to hope for such luck, took advantage of this. Now she couldn't miss the opportunity, because later she wouldn't be able to hold Marie accountable. It turned out that the butler Fram had already caught Lucy, whom he suspected of spoiling the monster's food. The lady herself did not expect that rumors would spread so quickly throughout the estate without her help. This meant that Rosie had indeed been in contact with Arjun before, although she hadn't realized it right away. The girl could only hope that the master would not come up with a punishment for her. But first, she had to deal with the maid, who was acting strangely to everyone. Lucy had no more options for escape, because someone noticed her mixing something into her food. Rosie was glad that Emily was on her side and followed the suspicious girl, so Lucy could only save herself by confessing, because no one else wanted to believe her lies. No one expected the maid to scream, as if it was Marie who had ordered her to mix in the poison. Lucy had a sister who had been sick since childhood, and for her sake, the girl was ready to do anything. It was not surprising that Marie did not like this betrayal, and she began to deny everything. In this situation, only the butler remained calm and fair due to his experience. Fram understood perfectly well that there was no point in Lucy simply lying about another person's guilt, but Marie was always stubborn, especially when it came to punishment for her wrong actions. Gertas didn't even hope that she would be able to prove her stubborn assistant's guilt so easily. But now at least Lucy was sent to prison, so Marie was left without a useful servant. Fram gave only a few stern orders, but no one dared to disobey him. At that moment, Emily was in 7th place, overjoyed, because she and her friend had won. However, Rosie was in no hurry to relax, because Marie was only confined to a room. However, the heroine was in for an unexpected promotion after what happened, since Fram liked her. The lady did not expect that the butler would offer her to become his personal maid because of her good qualities. All this time, the heroine's best friend Emily watched from the sidelines as she changed. The girl saw that Rosie seemed to have become a different person, but she couldn't explain it to herself. The pink-haired lady was now emitting such a pleasant energy that it was difficult to tear yourself away. But it was precisely for this reason that Marie became filled with incredible anger towards her clever rival. Before her imprisonment, she managed to contact the guard with whom they were in collusion. The guy and the girl had been dating for a long time and tried to support each other in everything, so only to him did Marie show her true feelings, her eyes flashing with anger. Now the maid needed to behave quietly. That's why she needed her beloved's help. The knight had to put his career at risk, but he was not prepared for such risks. However, the girl's gentle kisses quickly convinced him that he could not remain on the sidelines. They were so lost in their feelings that they didn't notice how Richard was watching them closely. At Marie's request, the next morning, the heroine was in for an unpleasant surprise that she didn't know about. Suddenly, a strange guy appeared in front of her in the dungeon, behaving very friendly. This man instantly clung to the girl, although she had no desire to communicate with him. An alarm sounded inside Rosie, who suspected that the guy had not appeared in front of her for no reason. She diligently refused any help, but the unknown person still did not leave her side. The lady got the impression that he was deliberately playing the role of a lover, that he was ready to be there. As a result, Gertas herself did not notice how she approached the guard, who was waiting for this. The knight took advantage of the moment and still added poison to the food that Rosie was guarding. At this moment, all the heroine's attention was focused on the clingy guy, so she didn't suspect any trickery on the part of the guard, who remained in the shadows. By chance, the lady even stood up for Richard, whom everyone around called nothing but a monster. But the girl believed that even animals should be addressed by their nicknames. She managed to end the conversation with a sweet smile, although she had the urge to hit the stranger hard. In the end, the unknown person remained behind, having fulfilled his mission of creating a diversionary tactic. The girl didn't know that Richard heard all her words perfectly well, but she didn't lie even once at that moment. Marmu was pleased to realize that the maid saw him as a human being and not a terrible monster. But Rosie was embarrassed, because the guy overheard words that were not intended for him. That man was clearly making Gertas emotional, and she gave it to him just so he would leave her alone. But now Miss had to prove to Richard that she did not feel sympathy for him. While the guy continued to smile radiantly, experiencing genuine joy, Rosie felt awkward under his gaze, as she was not used to such attention. As a result, the girl did something for which she was ashamed and afraid for a long time. Who would have thought that the usually attentive and careful Rosie would accidentally drop food? The girl herself could hardly believe that she had made such a mistake next to such a dangerous man. Richard's gaze filled with disappointment, because he didn't like being made to wait for a long time. Of course, the lady could have brought another portion of food, but lost time could not be returned. But in fact, the magician laughed not because of this incident, but because of the maid's carelessness. Until the very end, the heroine could not understand what exactly this strange wizard meant. While Richard had long suspected the guard of conspiring with Marie, he had to remain silent. As soon as Rosie heard about this, she immediately asked Marm to tell her everything in more detail. Meanwhile, the maid, who was locked up, was restless due to the lack of news. She tried so hard to harm the monster, but for some reason, her beloved was slow. But soon, one of the assistants brought the girl good news, because Richard had become ill. This made Marie very happy, because now she could clear herself of all suspicions of poisoning. A huge crowd of curious maids gathered in the main hall, where they now blamed Rosie for everything. But the heroine remained calm, as she had prepared this dangerous plan in advance. Gertas allowed Marie to rejoice uncontrollably while she still had the opportunity. But in fact, the heroine did not even think of losing this battle, because she was fighting not only herself. The girl could hardly contain her malicious look, because in fact Marie had fallen into her trap. The maid was so happy that she didn't immediately notice something was wrong, because there wasn't a drop of regret on Rosie's face. On the contrary, Gertas felt no fear, because now she was closer to victory than ever before. If it weren't for Richard, the lady wouldn't have been able to defeat her cunning and insidious opponent so easily and quickly. And now Marie had no chance of escape, although the girl herself did not yet suspect this. Of course, Richard didn't just make a deal with the maid because he needed a benefit for himself. For the sake of truth, the heroine was ready to do anything, but she was not going to help the magician escape. But the girl didn't expect that the guy would be jealous of her towards the security guard with whom she communicated more. In fact, all these conversations were forced because the night was needed for the plan. But a slight resentment still ate at the magician because he considered himself much better than the incomprehensible guard. Moreover, Richard saw how this man deceitfully distracted the attention of a beautiful maid. He was sure that Marie had a reason for talking to this security guard late at night. It was not for nothing that the girl had the feeling that the guy was not interested in her at all. Rosie's anger filled her with a desire to take revenge on all her offenders, including the captured Richard. She still couldn't forgive the guard for the fact that he had recently beaten a prisoner. Marm had no idea that this circumstance had offended the lady so much, since he himself had provoked the night. Only now, Richard admitted that all of this was specially arranged on his part. Although the lady did not approve of the magician's actions, only with his help could she defeat Marie. This is how the heroine achieved victory, because her plan contained many unknown variables. Miss was so confident of her victory that she was not even afraid to answer in front of everyone. The other maids shouted that Rosie was a criminal, but Fram tried to be fair. He planned to take all opinions into account before making a final verdict for the assistant. As luck would have it, Richard's bodyguard was on Marie's side, but no one knew about their romantic relationship. Emily didn't know then that her friend had everything under control, so she was pale with fear. She was deeply hurt by the knight's words that he had not noticed anything unusual near the dungeon that morning. The red-haired girl believed that Rosie was innocent, but she couldn't prove it. In this situation, the butler had no other suspects, no matter how sorry he was. The man liked Rosie, but he had no right to just take her side. Marie sat in the room all day long, so she certainly could not have poisoned the prisoner. But Gertas had many opportunities for this, although she seemed like a good girl to everyone. Fram did not suspect the cook of anything, only because the man had been working at the estate for many years. An unpleasant feeling of powerlessness overwhelmed the butler, who could not save the sweet girl. He didn't really think Rosie was a criminal, but he needed physical evidence. Fram always listened to logic, not to his heart, because that is what his master demanded of him. And soon the time came for the heroine's final game, for which she had been preparing for a long time. Of course, the lady had no way of getting evidence of Marie's guilt, but she was going to provoke her. The girl clearly did not expect that her rival would be so confident in her rightness. Unlike her, all this time, Marie thought that Rosie had nothing on her, but now she began to doubt it. Previously, the maid was sure that the fruit should not have harmed the monster so much, so she herself did not fully understand what exactly was happening to the prisoner, whom everyone disliked. Her hope was to win over the butler's opinion to her side, since he was the one who decided everything in this matter. The girl's cover was that she sat locked up all night on the orders of Fram himself, so the man could not deny the fact that there was nothing more to suspect about Marie. But as soon as the maid presented the evidence, the assistant suddenly began whispering. It turned out that in a fit of emotion, the girl accidentally said that she knew about sending with the help of a fetus. Emily was the first to seize on this failure, as she was dying to justify her friend. While studying the case, Fram learned that Richard had indeed been gradually poisoned with some kind of substance, but no one except the poisoner herself knew that a fetus was involved. There was no longer any doubt left in anyone's mind that this maid was indeed guilty. The butler even treated the guard, who was secretly on the maid's side, cruelly. The heroine could not have imagined that her investigation would acquire such proportions in such a short time. Now no one will escape responsibility, and the lady does not even need to personally supervise it. If Marie had not succumbed to the provocation, she could now live peacefully in the estate. So Rosie was glad that this maid was so emotionally uninhibited. The matter was resolved quickly, and Richard was no longer in danger of being poisoned by the fetus. So finally, the heroine could breathe a sigh of relief, because she had been trying to achieve this for so long. The girl could not even imagine that the next problems would await her in the person of Marm. She tried to fulfill any of his requests, in order to at least slightly ease the prisoner's condition. And this led to Richard's appetite only growing stronger, due to the girl's kindness. Until now, the guy's requests had confused the lady because she was afraid to refuse him. Suddenly, Marmu wanted to look at the girl's back, and she guessed why. Questions were swirling in Richard's head about whether the lady belonged to a dangerous group. That's why he was so eager to see if the girl had a corresponding mark. At that moment, the heroine did not yet know that the guy suspected her of something, but she could not resist. Rosie was afraid of the consequences, because Richard's mood could change due to any little thing. Marm acted sweetly, but the lady knew that something terrible was hidden behind such behavior. So the girl did not refuse the guy, because she was sure that everything would be fine with her. Richard was clearly surprised to see Rosie's obedience, as the maids usually ran away from him. And this assistant looked at me with such a look as if she could easily stand up for herself. Besides, in her world there was nothing wrong with girls showing their shoulders to guys. That's why the heroine reacted so calmly, although any other maid would have run away long ago. But the lady's heart did not even begin to beat faster, despite the fact that the situation was exciting. It was only after a few seconds that Rosie felt the atmosphere in the air change subtly. For some reason, Richard behaved quietly and calmly, although he usually made caustic jokes in such cases. Only now did the guy admit that he suspected the miss of belonging to demon worshippers. These people put a brand on their backs, which would give them away upon a thorough examination of their bodies. Rosie had no intention of joining this organization, which scared her to death. So the girl was outraged by the fact that the guy secretly suspected her of something like that. The young man did not think that the miss would not show him her back if she had such a brand. All this time, Rosie felt that she had given no reason to suspect her honesty, and this time their conversation was interrupted by Emily, who had urgent news for her friend. Girtas herself was thinking of leaving soon, since she had been held up in the dungeon with the guy for a long time. Marm pretended that he didn't mind letting the girl go, although everything inside him was clenched with regret. But Rosie didn't want to show Emily how good a relationship she had with Richard, so the magician was left alone again, although he tried to get more time to talk with the maid. But Emily made adjustments to his plans, and the guy had no right to object to this girl. No matter how hard Rosie tried to hide everything, her friend immediately noticed that the monster was calm next to her. But all the other maids most often ran away in horror because of Richard's behavior. With all these thoughts, Emily even forgot that Argan wanted to see Rosie in his bedroom. Noble aristocrats sometimes did this and invited maids to serve as their personal maids. But the heroine was not pleased with this strange promotion, which she did not strive for. The girl didn't know that Richard heard their words, and that's why anger filled his entire body. The lady tried to object for some time, but all her attempts were ignored. Rosie dreamed of a quiet life on the estate, but something always went wrong. And now, the girl had to deal with the consequences of having attracted the gentleman's attention. It was impossible to tell from Argan's handsome face what exactly he was thinking about at that moment. It turned out that Avantes had long wanted to make Rosie his personal maid, but she refused. The heroine remembered well that, according to the plot, cooperation with Argan would not bring her anything pleasant, but she couldn't tell him about it, so she had to come up with stupid excuses. One of these was that Rosie was soon going to marry some lover. In fact, there was no groom, but the heroine managed to come up with only this reason. Argan was so reluctant to let the girl go that he offered her one of the servants as a partner. But Girtas was only angered by this attitude, because it was clear that the gentleman did not care. Avantes thought only of himself, and would have liked this particular maid to serve him. From childhood, he considered love a useless resource, and he taught others the same logic. As a child, he suffered so much misfortune because of love that he did not wish such evil on anyone. The heroine knew that in his youth, Argan often tried to get at least a drop of attention from his parents, but they constantly turned away from him, and eventually the boy began to hate himself. He believed that he was ugly in appearance, and therefore unworthy of anyone's love. While for everyone, Avantes seemed like a role model and an elegant appearance. But while the guy considered himself a freak, few people were able to convince him otherwise. So it was more difficult for the heroine to defend her desire to marry only the man she loved. Seeing the maid's stubborn look, Argan realized that he would not be able to dissuade her from quitting. The heroine did not even hope that the gentleman would leave her alone so quickly, despite his desires. Avantes' thoughts were occupied by this girl, since only she noticed the broken chains of the monster. It turned out that the gentleman had always kept a close eye on Richard, although no one knew about it. He deliberately broke the chains because he wanted to test the maid's loyalty and attentiveness. That's why, of all the assistants, Argan chose Rosie, who tried to escape. But what surprised the gentleman most about this situation was that Richard had not asked for medicine for a long time. The heroine completely forgot that in her presence, the guy felt better and did not need a potion. The girl was forced to admit that she had periodically given the potion to the monster without permission. But this wasn't what worried Argan, because Marm couldn't be cured with such a quantity of medicine. Only the heroine knew that her aura was healing for people like the strong Richard. In fact, Ivantes was just playing with the girl because he liked to see people's emotions. But the lady managed to maintain an outward calm, despite the panic and fear deep inside. Just as Miss was about to leave, Argan reminded her that she was serving in his bedroom today. But Rosie had barely gotten used to the duties of an ordinary maid, so she knew nothing about it. Gertas hoped that all she needed to do was clean and change the bed linen. But in reality, Argan's request was much more intimate, but he didn't dare say so. Rosie's serene face showed that she truly didn't understand the meaning of her assignment. So this time, Ivantes took pity and let go of the girl, who pleased him with her behavior. While the master was distracted by the maid, the accused guard tried to escape outside the estate. He had already regretted many times that he had helped Marie and ended up in such a deplorable situation. So the only salvation for the young man was to escape, and he knew who to turn to. The unknown gentleman who helped him get out was already waiting for the guy with a report in the secret hut. The guard still found it hard to believe that he had managed to escape eternal imprisonment, but the new ruler did not seek to kill the knight, even though he was a traitor at the Ivantes estate. This man was only interested in information about the maids who helped young Argan. The whole point was that he was looking for his missing sister, and he still hadn't gotten any closer to his goal. But in the knight's report, there was a girl who, according to the description, resembled the very same missing Lady Gertas. That is why Yurta Gertas came out of the shadows, although he had been secretly searching for his sister for a long time. Only the Count's faithful assistant did not believe that Rosie was the same girl from the gentleman's life. The guy always remained wary, since they made mistakes in their choices many times. But Yurta was already anticipating victory, so he wasn't interested in the opinion of his faithful servant. The guard was so afraid for his life that he answered even the strangest questions from the Count. He described in detail the appearance of the heroine, who really was Rosie, although she did not remember it. Thanks to the knight's betrayal, Yurta finally found the girl he needed so much. At that moment, the lady had no idea how the threat was once again hanging over her. The Count deliberately chose a remote location so that no one could discover his hiding place. Now that he had finally found his sister, Yurta couldn't afford to sit still any longer. At the moment, he could only trust Asel, who had never betrayed him before. The only consolation for Gertas was that Ivantes would soon be hosting a banquet for the aristocrats. Since Rosie was at that estate, the Count was bound to be present at the event. He had been looking for a girl for so many years, so he was not ready to endure a few more moments. Yurta was burning with impatience, but tried to act covertly so as not to frighten the lady ahead of time. That night, the heroine dreamed of a past that once belonged to the real Rosie. At the age of 13, the mother brought her daughter to Count Gertas, from whom she gave birth to her. Back then, the girl behaved completely differently, because her body had not yet been occupied by the current Rosie. She hardly talked to anyone because she had no interest in anything in life. The little girl could have lived peacefully if it weren't for one of her older brothers who didn't love her. Dylan hated Rosie from the very beginning, as she took up almost all of their strict father's attention. That's why the boy was ready to humiliate the lady for hours, just so she would escape from their estate. There was not a drop of pity in his eyes for his sister, who could not fight back because of her weakness. Only Yurta stopped his brother from beating the girl, because he considered it unfair. Usually the guy stayed away, but he was tired of the constant cruelty of the jealous Dylan. No matter how brave the boy was against the girl, he did not dare say a word to his older brother. So each time it ended with Yurta unwittingly saving Rosie from serious injury. But in the little girl's head, he was not a hero, although he tried to help her in any situation. At that time, Yurta had not yet acquired his cruelty, but the lady already hated him with all her heart. Rosie didn't hesitate to drive her brother away, despite the fact that he protected her from the unpleasant Dylan. And it all led to Yurta becoming obsessed with the girl who was constantly running away from him. From such a nightmare, the heroine suddenly opened her eyes, trying to understand what exactly she saw. For a long time, the girl was shaking with horror, because she had never seen such dreams before. Only after some time did the lady realize that these were Rosie's memories, which were the reason she had not slept well. Emily quickly noticed the pitiful state of her friend, to whom she had always been attentive. What she saw did not leave the girl's thoughts for a long time, as the images from the dream frightened her. She had never met Dylan in this life, but for some reason she remembered his face well. What can we say about dear Yurta, who has long since grown up and become a completely different person? All this told the girl that she really was the very same runaway sister of Gertas. So life in the world of this novel promised the lady unforeseen difficulties that she had to deal with. She remembered that Rosie was not a blood relative of Yurta, but he still looked for her. Until now, the lady did not know exactly why the girl decided to run away from her family, which was rich. Trying to hide as a maid might have worked if the information hadn't leaked. It was clear to Rosie that Lady Gertas did not want to return home if she was prepared to work as a servant. All day, Emily observed the strange state of her friend, who remained thoughtful. The girl could not explain Rosie's behavior, and she stubbornly did not answer any questions. So far, the only thing that saved the heroine was that Count Gertas did not distribute portraits of her appearance. The boy tried to find his sister on his own, and his persistence could soon lead to the Ivantes' estate. Rosie had no idea what she should do to avoid being seen by her stepbrother, and Emily couldn't help her friend in this situation in any way, because she didn't know all the details of the case. Meanwhile, Rosie couldn't get another guy out of her head, who was still sitting in prison. Richard felt better every time the girl appeared next to him. He had long noticed that the scent of her body was able to relieve his pain due to the magic inside. That's why the guy was sure that he needed this lady, because otherwise he would suffer. Only Rosie dared to act so brazenly when she was around a powerful magician. Only on her orders did the boy silently peel potatoes. Although before he had been sitting idle in the dungeon, Marm himself couldn't remember the last time he smiled so sincerely. Despite the pain, in a short period of time, the maid became an important person for the magician, although he denied it. But now the young man could not imagine his life without the girl who was able to heal him from pain. That is why his face was distorted with rage when he saw another servant who brought him food. It turned out that it was her turn to look after the monster, and the poor girl was trembling with fear. Of course, Richard had no intention of listening to the new girl, because he only needed Rosie. At that moment, the heroine didn't yet know that the guy would make a scene because her shift was over. She continued to help around the estate, while few people knew that the lady was planning to quit. But rumors quickly reached the butler, who was worried about this unpleasant situation. He saw the girl as one of his best assistants, so he didn't want to lose such golden hands. Fram had never met a lady like Rosie before, so he was sad to part with her. The heroine stuck to the legend that she was going to get married, and that's why she couldn't stay. She believed that the butler would quickly find a maid to replace her, because there were more of them. Although Rosie was sad to leave the estate, she was afraid that Yurta might soon find her. At exactly that moment, the girl's peaceful life was once again disrupted by the appearance of a maid. Ella's face was tear-stained with fear, and she could hardly tell what had happened to her. The girl returned from the dungeon to swap shifts with Rosie next to the monster. She was unable to return to work because the guy had scared her to death in just a couple of minutes. The heroine did not expect that unexpected problems would arise so quickly with the wayward Marm. She saw panic in Ella's eyes, but she had no right to return to her place on duty. The maid went so far as to blame her condition on Rosie, who refused to serve the monster. Who knows how far Ella's hysteria could have gone if the butler hadn't intervened in time. Rosie didn't expect that Richard's insolent behavior could frighten the other maids so much. It was clear that Ella was in complete despair, as she did not know how to deal with the monster. Although the lady could not replace the girl, since she could not stay near Marm for long, she wanted to help. It had never occurred to any of the maids that a magician could be appeased with some kind of work. So Ella was surprised when Rosie brought her several kilograms of potatoes. Every time Gertas gave Richard such a task, he behaved calmly for a while. No one expected this method to actually work, but Ella had no other options. Eventually, the girls met again that same evening, and the maid thanked Rosie for her help. The only thing that surprised the heroine was the condition of the potatoes, which Richard peeled into small pieces. Meanwhile, Aesel was worried about the state of Count Gertas, who was obsessed with his sister. The boy remembered well the time when Yurta took out his anger and hatred even on those closest to him. The Count tried many times to find Rosie using the reward, but received false information. And finally, a girl who closely resembled Lady Gertas's description was finally found. Asel was very worried that the lady was on the estate of the famous Marquis Ivantes. Before Gertas, he had no right to interfere in the affairs of other aristocrats, as this threatened the loss of status. That's why Yurta approached things from a different angle, trying to establish cooperation with Arjun. Of course, the guy started all this only in order to quickly find his beloved sister. It never occurred to him that he could fail at the estate of the Marquis of Evantes. But Asel was much more anxious. But the gentleman, as usual, did not listen to his opinion. When Yurta appeared at the estate, the heroine was not prepared for such a turn of events. The girl barely managed to hide, and now she was thinking with horror about how to escape unnoticed. The Count behaved with importance, as if he himself was the owner of this place, and not just a guest of the Marquis of Avantes. Rosie's biggest fear was that she would catch Yurta's eye, and then all her plans would be ruined. Seeing her friends panic, Emily decided that she was sick, and the lady took advantage of this. She had less and less time left before meeting a guy she would rather not see. But for now, Gertas was showing miracles of inattention and did not notice his sister, whose hair was bright. So the heroine just had to run away before the Count looked in her direction. As luck would have it, at that very moment, the girl was in such a hurry that she bumped into one of the servants with her shoulder. The guy immediately threw a tantrum, which attracted the attention of the curious Count Gertas. No matter how hard Rosie tried to hide among the crowd, nothing could save her from detection. It was Emily who accidentally gave away her friend because she called her by name at the most inopportune moment. Finally, the sister's location was revealed to Yurta, who had been looking for the girl for a long time. The assistant clearly wanted compensation for his bruised shoulder, even though he wasn't even in pain. If it weren't for Arjun, who suddenly blocked the girl, Rosie could well have suffered in this situation. Avantes wanted the event to go smoothly and quietly, so he resolved all conflicts. That's why the master gently hinted that the servant shouldn't have made a scene over such a trifle. The heroine was so afraid that she didn't even feel gratitude towards Arjun, who helped her at that moment. The guy had to personally remind the maids that they should return to their rooms. But the anxiety did not subside inside Rosie, who was unable to escape from her stepbrother in time. The girl was ready to swear that their eyes met, and Yurta recognized her perfectly. The lady did not need the gift of clairvoyance to understand that she was in big trouble. Now even her friend's kind words could not console Rosie, who had no choice but to flee the estate. If it weren't for the loud assistant, Yurta would never have noticed the girl who almost managed to get away. Gertas was grateful to Arjun for his help, but in the end it didn't make things any better for her. Anxiety filled the entire consciousness of the heroine, who had little idea what to do next. The last thing she wanted was to involve Emily in her problems, so she chose to say goodbye. The friend had so much to do that she obediently left Rosie alone, although she was very worried. As soon as Gertas was left alone, she hurried to her room, but was just a little late. The girl was prepared for the fact that one of her brother's assistants would suddenly call her for a serious conversation. It turned out that it was Asel who came on Yurta's orders, and he always did everything perfectly. He quickly dismissed the lady's pathetic attempts to pretend that she did not bear the surname Gertas. The guy had no doubt that his master was not mistaken about this girl. Rosie really did look like Lady Gertas, although Asel had only seen the young lady from afar in the past. He brought news that Yurta would be eagerly awaiting the knight to meet her sister. The knight did not need anything else from the girl, since he had not yet received any orders. As soon as Rosie heard that her brother wanted to meet her, her whole body trembled with horror. The girl's entire consciousness was consumed by the desire to escape. But there was too little time to escape, so the heroine couldn't think of anything better to do than hide in the dungeon, where Yurta couldn't come. For a while, Rosie doubted whether she was making the right choice in this situation. But if the mist did not want to catch the eye of the impudent count, then she had no other choice. The girl was so lucky that even the guard did not notice her secret entry into the dungeon. In the heroine's head, Yurta resembled a mad and wounded wolf who did not obey anyone, while Richard now resembled a calm tiger, although he too was a dangerous predator. Of two evils, the lady had to choose the lesser in order to alleviate possible suffering. That's why she quietly entered the dungeon of a guy who would never let her go. All this time, Marm was eagerly awaiting Rosie's return. Although she was busy with other things, the girl immediately noticed with relief that this time the guy was in a good mood from the very beginning. Richard didn't have time to get angry during Rosie's absence, although he was upset when he didn't see her. But now the guy's eyes were shining with joy, because the girl had finally visited him in prison. The magician's patience was running out, because he had not seen the lady he liked very much for more than a day. But the girl was in no hurry to throw herself into the arms of a guy who could very well hurt her. But Rosie had no other choice, because she herself came to Richard in the dungeon, although she could have escaped. As soon as Miss touched the magician, he pulled her towards him with force, because he wanted to feel her warmth. Richard inhaled the girl's scent with pleasure, which brought him relief. But Rosie was still haunted by the question of what Marm had done to Ella just this morning. It turned out that the guy didn't even try to scare that maid. He just accidentally looked at her menacingly. He didn't like the fact that Ella started praising herself over Rosie, and the guy made it clear with his look. The young man did not need any other girl except Lady Gertas, because only she brought him relief. But the heroine was not thrilled that the guy had become so attached to her in such a short period of time. Richard was ready to admire the girl who brought him relief for an eternity. That's why the boy planned to take Rosie with him when he escaped from prison. But the heroine was not ready to participate in such a plan, which threatened her with consequences. Although Richard promised the maid to get everything she wanted if they ran away from the estate together. But Rosie couldn't take such a step, because in the novel, Marm was a very dangerous person. What bothered her most was that in the original story, the guy didn't tell anyone about his plan. He escaped on his own one day, and Avantes was unable to catch the powerful wizard. The girl's intuition told her that some aspects of reality had changed because of her actions. She pretended not to have heard such an impudent proposal from Richard, which was dangerous. Miss honestly admitted that she did not want to risk her life to help the prisoner of the Marquise's estate. Richard's face darkened from this answer, but he did not argue with the girl so as not to frighten her. The magician's idea seemed good to the heroine, who herself was thinking about running away. So the girl quickly collected all the things, of which she had very little. She planned to leave as quietly as possible, before any of her enemies noticed her absence. At first, everything went well, and the lady believed that she would be able to escape from her terrible brother. She ran so fast as if a real monster was chasing her, although no one had ever chased Miss yet. It turned out that Yurta knew about his sister's escape, so he was waiting for her right near the estate gates. The guy greedily embraced the girl, because he was not going to let her go anywhere. The Count missed his sister so much, because she also brought him relief from pain. Now he couldn't let Rosie escape, because for so long he had been trying to find her anywhere. The young man might have seemed handsome to anyone, but the heroine knew his true identity. This guy was not a nice person at all, although he tried to treat the lady kindly. But Rosie's breath caught in her throat with fear, as she realized how dangerous her brother was. He whispered promises in her ear that the girl would no longer need anything in her life. It didn't occur to Yurta that the heroine had run away, not because she had been deprived of riches. The Count did not expect that his missing sister would suddenly show him serious resistance and stubbornness. The girl had no desire whatsoever to return to the Gerdas estate, which she said honestly. Anger awoke inside the boy, who hated it when things went against his wishes. The heroine endured her brother's company, only because she had been preparing for a long time to meet him. So now the impudent Yurta did not frighten the girl as much as her unlucky predecessor. The Count tried to restrain himself until the very end, so as not to harm the young lady due to his emotions. He needed Rosie alive because she had useful abilities, although he didn't know it. During the entire time of separation, the boy suffered from pain in his body, since there was a lot of magic inside him, and only the girl's presence allowed me to feel the long-awaited relief and calm. Only now did the heroine remember that Yurta suffered from the same problem as Richard. The Count also had to drink magical suppressants, but they were only a weak medicine. Marm told the girl more than once that he didn't even need to drink those strange potions when he was around her. It was only at this moment that Rosie realized that she possessed an aura that was capable of healing. That's why almost nothing was said about this lady in the novel, because Yurta hid his sister from everyone. Even now, the guy promised that no one would see Rosie again once they returned to the estate. For many nights he imagined this sweet moment when his sister would belong only to him. the heroine had no chance of escape, but the sudden appearance of a third person saved her. It turned out to be Argan, who liked this servant so much that he did not want to let her go. Besides, Ivantes could not allow anyone to be kidnapped on his territory. Upon seeing the gentleman, the lady rushed to him for help, since only he could help her now. Their desires coincided, because Argan also did not want Yurta to take the young girl with him. No matter how hard the Count tried to prove that Rosie was his sister, he had no worthy arguments. The heroine stubbornly continued to deny their relationship, since she had no intention of returning back. Who would have thought that Argan would lie that Rosie was his personal servant, so she couldn't quit? Ivantes didn't blink an eye, despite the fact that the girl had only been in his bedroom once. Miss felt behind her how intently Yurta began to look at her after these words. It was not surprising that the guy did not forgive the girl for such a status in someone else's estate. For the first time in a long time, the heroine felt so tired, although the conversation had not lasted long. At that moment, what she dreamed of most was to be away from all the problems. As a result, Yurta had to retreat today, since he did not want to quarrel with the Marquis. The girl didn't even hope that the Count would let her go so easily after their first meeting. But Ivantes was too important a person for the Goethes family, so the boy could not resist him. As soon as the Count left, the heroine immediately changed her mind about running away, because she would be safer with Argan. The gentleman himself understood this perfectly well, so he advised the girl to return to her room. He didn't like it when things happened without his knowledge, and the lady's escape fell into that category. Miss didn't immediately realize that she had angered Ivantes quite a bit with her secret actions. The boy had no more orders for the maid today, so he wished her good night. The heroine had a great deal of trouble keeping a sweet smile on her face, as she was trembling with fear. As a result, the girl was so worried that she couldn't fall asleep, no matter how hard she tried to force herself to. From the very beginning, Rosie wanted to live quietly and unnoticed, but something constantly ruined her plans. It all led to the fact that Goethes had no idea how she needed to escape from her brother. She understood that now the Marquis's estate was the only safe place for her. The heroine's morning sadness was suddenly broken by her friend, who burst into the room noisily. All night, Emily was worried about the condition of Rosie, who left work early yesterday. It was from her friend that the heroine learned that Count Goethes had decided to stay at the estate for a while. His assistant Assel was not thrilled with this idea, as the gentleman had a lot of things to do at home, but Yurta himself considered the return of his sister to be the most important thing, and for this he needed to convince her. The guy had no doubt that he would eventually achieve his goal, as he always did. Assel was also confident in the master, so he could only sigh silently to the side. If the Count had already decided something for himself, no one could force him to change his mind. And now, Yurta has thrown all his efforts into making Rosie want to return home with him. The next morning, Ella, as usual, served the monster with apprehension, which she was deathly afraid of. But this time, the guy tried to appease the maid with a sweet smile, so that she would fulfill his request. Although the assistants were ordered not to help the prisoner, curiosity proved stronger. The whole point was that the magician had beautifully peeled the potatoes in advance for Rosie's sake. Ella's task was to cook this food and give it to the servant that the monster liked. It was important to Richard that the message reached Rosie, because this was his way of asking for forgiveness. He could only hope that his beautiful assistant would not be offended by his thoughts of escape. But the heroine had no time to think about Marm, since all her thoughts were about Count Goethes. She was so deep in thought about her brother that she didn't immediately notice Ella's appearance next to her. But the girl expected even less that the maid would still give her the potatoes from Richard. Ella was beside herself with fear, but she did not dare ignore the monster's request. This is how the heroine received the cooked potatoes, although she did not understand the motives of the powerful magician. The only thing that was clear to the lady was that Marm had not tried for nothing, because he wanted to attract her attention. However, Miss felt that Richard would close himself off from her after she refused to help with the escape. This guy still seemed abnormal to the heroine, and she had reasons to think so. While Miss was feeling confused, Richard finally began his long-awaited escape. It took him some time to break both the chains and the prison gates with one explosion, and now nothing could hold back the boy who had learned the shackles that held him back. Marm knew that his aura should have spread by now, so they would start looking for him soon. Of course, he wasn't going to think about escaping without Rosie, So he had to find her. If only the girl had listened to Richard right away, he wouldn't have had to work so hard. Whatever the wizard offered the lady, for some reason, she never agreed to run away with him. While the young man could not think of anyone else, except the girl who saved him from pain, Richard didn't know why this was happening, but he was sure that he would hardly be able to find another person like him. No matter what he did, the distance between him and the girl did not decrease, but only increased, and the young man wanted Rosie to feel the same strong attraction to him as he felt to her. That's why he was going to find her, even though he knew it would be madness, because the Marquise would be looking for him. At that moment, the heroine did not suspect that Richard was planning to brazenly kidnap her, along with himself. The girl already had a lot of problems, as loud explosions were heard somewhere in the estate. The maids were the first to sound the alarm, as they were powerless in unexpected situations. Quite quickly, the knights learned that the monster had just escaped from captivity. Even Emily didn't know what to do in such a situation, because it was the first time something like this had happened. Only the heroine did not lose her composure, and asked her friend to hide in a safe place as quickly as possible. Rosie herself ran straight towards the danger because she wanted to know what was going on. Until the very end, she did not believe that Marm had actually escaped from prison, because this was supposed to happen later. That place was specially prepared to deprive the magician of all his abilities. The girl was haunted by disturbing thoughts about the impact her actions had on the plot. She noticed that Argan and Yurta also acted differently after they talked to her at least once. The lady was distracted from her thoughts by the sudden cry of a servant who was panicking and calling for someone to help. It turned out that the assistant had accidentally caught the eye of Richard, who was looking for Rosie everywhere. Marm was taking a big risk because he could have escaped long ago, but he couldn't do it without the maid. The heroine did not know that the guy was looking for her, as she hoped that he was already outside the estate. The lady was too close to the wizard, so she was afraid to even move. She was afraid that the guy wanted to take revenge on her for her indifference. Otherwise, why would he look for her? The lady had no idea that Richard needed her alive, because she helped him cope with the pain. The servant barely managed to lie that he saw a pink-haired girl near the stables, and did not remember anything else. This gave the heroine a chance to escape, but again something unexpected happened. The lady accidentally touched the leaves, and the rustling gave away her location, which was not an option. As a result, Richard became interested in the man who was hiding from him behind the leaves. Meanwhile, Yurta only now became interested in the noise that thundered throughout the entire estate. The butler was not yet aware of the details, but promised to find out everything soon. Fram's job was to quickly find out any news on the estate. All the assistants trusted him, so the butler was quickly informed about the cause of the strange noise. Yurta's heart leapt with anticipation when he learned that he could fight the escaped mage. Aesel immediately guessed that his master would not miss the opportunity to practice his skills. Richard had been known for many years for his power, which he could barely control due to its strength. And Yurta always loved to test his abilities, so this was the perfect moment for him. Besides, Gertas immediately realized that the monster was looking for his sister, and he couldn't allow Marmu to do that. Before Aesel could even blink, his master was already preparing for a brutal fight with the magician. In this situation, the assistant had no choice but to obediently bring the weapon. Yurta's eyes burned with rage, because he would not allow anyone to touch his runaway sister. He didn't yet know that Richard had already found a girl, although he himself didn't suspect it. Rosie kept her identity a secret until the very end, hoping to escape from the magician. But Marm was not going to let go of his intended target, as he was angry that people were hiding from him. His patience was wearing thin, as he had no idea that he was talking to Rosie. The heroine tried to take advantage of this, since she did not want to catch the magician's eye. But without shackles and chains, the boy easily used the magic that boiled in his blood from inaction. As a result, the girl was consumed by terrible pain, which forced her to temporarily forget how to breathe. Gertas was so afraid she could no longer move, and thought only about how to end this suffering. As soon as the guy heard a woman scream, he immediately realized that he had made a serious mistake. As soon as he saw Rosie, all his anger instantly disappeared, replaced by joy from the meeting. Only after this did he allow the girl to speak, although the lady almost choked from lack of air. Inside the heroine, the desire to escape still burned, because she was afraid of punishment from the monster. But Richard behaved friendly with the maid, since he needed her alive and unharmed. So the guy remained affectionate, although in her head, the lady believed that he would quickly kill her. In Marm's eyes, the girl was beautiful even when she cried, because he fell head over heels in love with her. But Rosie wasn't happy about this newfound affection, having barely escaped from her brother the day before. The young man believed that their meeting was predetermined by fate. Otherwise, how could one explain such a speed of rapprochement? But the heroine was still afraid that literally in a moment, Richard would brutally kill her. The magician was very surprised when he heard about the lady's fear, because he had never even thought of anything like that. All this time, he was looking for her not at all in order to punish her for something. Besides, madness had not yet arrived, so the guy planned to take Rosie with him because he could live happily with her. But the heroine did not allow herself to be deceived, because in fact, the wizard was trying to brazenly kidnap her from the estate. The girl hoped until the very end that she would be able to preserve her freedom and independence. But the longer she delayed agreeing, the more anger arose inside Richard. It was not difficult for the lady to guess that Marm was not the type to give her a choice. She was already thinking about the fact that Yorta and Richard needed her because they suffered from magic. And even Arjun could not help the girl, since he also pursued his own selfish goals. So, no matter what choice the lady made, the end could still turn out to be death for her. Only a man's voice, which suddenly cut through the silence, pulled the girl out of her heavy thoughts. She didn't even have time to turn around before Richard grabbed her to save her from the lightning strike. It turned out that this time, Yorta was not afraid to harm his sister, just to achieve his goal. The boy was determined to fight the wizard, whose power was the subject of much speculation in the Empire. Fear once again overwhelmed Rosie, who still couldn't escape from the boys. Marm understood that he had not managed to escape with the lady, and now he had to protect her. Gertas had no plans to retreat, even if he was bleeding and slowly losing consciousness. In this situation, the heroine found herself at a disadvantage, since she did not want to join anyone. The ideal situation for the girl was to run away, but it was as if any of the guys would allow her that luxury. While the lady was thinking about what to do, Yorta was already preparing for battle with the enemy. Richard himself was glad to practice magic, since he had not fought anyone for a long time. Seeing this picture, a recent memory came to Rosie's mind when Argan protected her. Although the guys' personalities changed, the meaning remained the same, and for some reason, they fought over her. The lady could not bear the thought of being left unarmed in their company. So soon, Miss found for herself at least some kind of lifeline, which gave her courage. It turned out to be a small stick, but such a weapon was better than empty and weak hands. The girl ran towards the weapon so quickly that Richard didn't even have time to stop her from escaping. Only with the log in her hands did the lady feel better, although it was still not enough. The boys clearly didn't expect Rosie to put up such resistance to each of them. It was clear from the girl's eyes that she was extremely serious and would fight to the end. As usual, Marm did not stand aside, as he liked to provoke the ladies to emotions, but she waved the log in his direction so menacingly that the guy did not approach the girl. This circumstance puzzled the wizards, who could easily break Rosie with magic. But Yorta was glad that his sister had stood up to the monster, and he forgot that she wouldn't approach him either. The heroine's heart was beating so fast that it seemed as if it would soon burst out of her chest. She was somewhat reassured by the fact that, for the moment, she had managed to keep Richard at a distance. The girl reminded the magician that he could end up in prison again if he didn't escape right now. But the guy was so confident in his abilities that he didn't pay attention to such a stupid possibility. Even Yorta was not able to resist the enemy if he took the matter seriously. The guy barely had time to shout for Rosie to be ready for the attack before it happened. The heroine would never have been able to notice the approach of Marm, who was moving with inhuman speed. It took Richard only a few seconds to close the distance between him and the lady. Horror at the fact that she was unable to resist completely overwhelmed the young girl. As soon as Marmu approached the maid, he immediately felt her pleasant and healing aroma. The heroine barely moved so as not to provoke the wizard. But he didn't need that. The boy breathed in the scent with relief, the scent that always took away his pain and suffering. But this time, something went wrong, as Marm's condition suddenly worsened. The guy himself couldn't understand what had happened, but consciousness began to slowly leave his body. He could only blame the girl for his pain, as she was now emitting painful odors. At that moment, the heroine did not yet suspect that she had accidentally changed the direction of her aura. And as a result, next to her, Marm felt not relief, but terrible pain throughout his entire body. Yurta immediately took advantage of this situation, at least to trap the monster in prison. Gertas himself could barely stand on his feet from the pain, but he stubbornly held the sword over the monster's head. Rosie had no idea what was going on or why both boys were acting so strange around her. Once again, Yurta reminded his sister that it would be better for her to return together to their native estate. But the lady continued to be stubborn, because she did not believe a single word of her cruel brother. Gertas remembered that there had been a situation in the past where the girl had been unable to defend herself, but Rosie didn't return the lady's memories, so she had no idea what had happened, so she couldn't appreciate how kind and caring her brother really was to her. The young man understood that he would not be able to convince his sister to follow him in just a few seconds. The time for their conversation ended the moment the guards noticed the group of people. The knights instantly bound the monster in magical chains, and he could no longer stop them. The boys were grateful to Yurta for catching the monster so easily while they were gone. But Gertas was only concerned about his sister's decision, which remained unchanged and negative. Now the lady saw her salvation only in the Marquis's estate, so she did not want to go anywhere. The knights quickly took Richard to prison and put even more shackles on him. The Marquis needed someone to blame for this situation, so he punished the monster's overseer. Surprisingly, even Ella got it, although she was only bringing food since it was her duty. These changes in the heroine's life forced her to continue to stay in the estate, where it was safe. The butler was happy to give the girl work again, since she did everything flawlessly. But Rosie's anxiety did not leave her, despite the fact that everything around her was gradually getting better. Soon Fram had to report to Argan about how things were now at the estate. The butler could not help but praise Gertas, who provided invaluable assistance in capturing the monster. Avantes did not expect that the Count, who for some reason was visiting him, would be so helpful. He was only glad that the whole situation with the escape was quickly and well resolved by the assistants. The only thing that bothered the gentleman was the rumor that Richard was looking for some pink-haired maid. Rosie's best friend was still trying to convince everyone that the girl had red hair. Although Argan knew the truth, he liked Emily's version, so he started to stick to it. The butler had not previously hoped that the master would also stand up for the defense of his best servant. In this situation, Ivantes was much more interested in why Yurta had interfered in his affairs. As the owner of the estate, he could not ignore the guest's actions, and therefore invited him to dinner. But during this event, all of Gertas' thoughts were not at all about the noble Ivantes. The guy was worried that the behavior and reactions of his beloved Rosie were unfamiliar to him. He was sure that the girl would be calmer, but she seemed to come alive for the first time in many years. Argan saw that his guest was lost in his thoughts, and out of politeness, he preferred not to bother him unnecessarily. However, he soon thanked Yurta for her participation in capturing the monster, which managed to escape. In fact, the guy was pursuing his own goals at that moment, so he didn't consider himself a hero. What was important to him was that he eventually managed to talk to his sister, even though she remained stubborn. Yurta was angry that Richard had his eye on the girl and was now planning to get closer to her. The Count had no doubt that Marm had long noticed the young lady's abilities. Since childhood, Rosie had an intoxicating scent that soothed the pain of magic. That's why Yurta wasn't going to share the girl who had been his healer for a long time with anyone. He was even willing to help the monster escape if he agreed to leave his sister alone. So far, the heroine's working days were passing calmly, but her heart was still not in the right place. The girl was consumed by guilt over the fact that the maid Ella was put in prison. The lady could have been in her place, and she still shared her experiences with her friend. If only Rosie could somehow help that maid, she definitely would have done it. But Emily had a different opinion on this matter, as she only cared about her friends. Even the cook remembered well that the maid tried to blame Rosie for everything. Before her imprisonment, Ella screamed loudly that the monster was looking for a pink-haired assistant. But in the end, nothing saved the girl from imprisonment, because she showed serious inattention. That's why Emily didn't feel sorry for the maid, since she was trying to drag her friend along with her. This warm reassurance made Rosie feel better, as sometimes all she needed was a few words of encouragement. But as usual, the peace could not last long when it came to the heroine's life. After lunch, one of the maids found the girl and reported the order from the head maid. Rosie was horrified that she had to look after the monster in the dungeon again. The assistant explained this by the fact that only the lady managed to emerge unharmed after contact with the monster. Who would have thought that the heroine would never be able to escape from Richard, no matter what she did? Miss could not argue with the orders from above. Besides, the maid was only passing on words, so Rosie had no choice but to obediently go about her duties. That same evening, she was forced to visit the outbuilding where the dungeon was located. The girl's hands trembled with excitement, as she was afraid of meeting the monster again. Even the increased number of security guards did not console Rosie, who knew that Richard would not let her go. At this time, Marm was still trying to understand why he had been captured again and locked up in a dungeon. A slight pain still spread throughout the boy's body from that strange scent of Rosie. Before this, the young man had thought that the miss was so fragile and weak that she could not hurt him. But reality turned out to be much more dangerous and harsh, and the magician was not prepared for such a turn of events. At the moment when he wanted to take the maid with him, something clearly went wrong. Richard tried to keep the girl close to him, as she was very useful to him. Marma enjoyed the rare moments when Rosie was especially obedient, as if it had always been that way. But he was seriously mistaken when he thought that the lady would remain locked in a cage. Now the guy was sure that this girl could be dangerous, although she herself did not know about it. The heroine slowly approached the dungeon with the monster, unaware of his heavy thoughts. But the lady's intuition told her that she couldn't trust this handsome guy. The whole point was that Richard wanted to run away again and then return for the lady who could help him. At the moment, the girl was not in any danger, but she still could not get rid of her fear. Rosie could only hope that Marm wouldn't take any action. So far, the guy had been acting so calmly, as if he really wasn't planning any mischief. He appeared to be almost unharmed, although Miss thought that Argan would punish him cruelly again. The girl was sure that the wizard's escape was thwarted because of some ability of hers. How else could one explain the fact that Richard suddenly began to lose consciousness before her eyes? The heroine so wanted to never meet the young man again, but fate did not hear her prayer. It was clear that the guy no longer resembled the Richard described in the novel, so the girl had to remain attentive, because no one else wanted to court the guy. The heroine had wanted to escape for a long time, but each time some circumstance stopped her, and now she was afraid that her brother, who remained in the estate, would quickly track her down. That's why Rosie had to pluck up the courage and come to Marm to look after him. Despite the unsuccessful escape, a sweet smile still played on Richard's face. The heroine felt awkward about this, because it was she who was to blame for the magician being caught. But Marm didn't even look at the girl with accusations, so she soon relaxed a little. The changes in the magician's behavior were very noticeable, because before he didn't smile all the time, but now the guy seemed so contented, as if he hadn't recently tried to escape from prison. Until it was obvious that she could influence powerful magicians, but the lady did not know how exactly. Miss was sure that Richard would never admit his recent weaknesses to her, but she still tried to find out why exactly the guy lost consciousness during the escape. As usual, Marm joked that the lady was so incredible that he couldn't resist her. All these barbed remarks did nothing to help Rosie better understand what she could do. But Richard continued to insist that he had never seen such a beautiful lady. The girl only became more angry because of the compliments, as she hoped to find out the truth. No matter what emotions Rosie felt towards him, Richard still remained content and happy. But the heroine was quite tired, because the magician constantly provoked her to react. Only before leaving did the guy admit that he would make his next escape together with the lady. He was going to prepare better so that he wouldn't make any mistakes by then. But Rosie had no intention of helping a man who thought too highly of himself. That evening, the lady dreamed only of sleep, but her adventures did not end in one dungeon. The heroine immediately spotted the handsome and stately figure of the young Marquis Ivantes in front of her. Rosie's greatest fear was that the master would again offer her to become his personal servant at the estate. Ivantes remembered well that only recently the assistant was going to leave the estate for love. The girl was so confident in her partner that the guy did not stop her from quitting. And now the heroine had to lie that she didn't have enough money for the wedding, so she decided to work. From the very beginning, Rosie tried to do everything to avoid getting close to the Marquis of Argane. But the gentleman had leverage over the lady, who had recently been sought by the escaped monster. The heroine understood perfectly well that the Marquis had not simply left her without serious punishment. Ivantes had selfish reasons for pretending that Rosie's hair was red, And now the Marquis was dying to know how the maid could interest Richard. The girl always suspected that this character in the novel also possessed great madness. And now Argan demonstrated his cruelty. Although he himself did not notice his feelings, Miss barely managed to lie that she only stayed with Richard during his meals. She could see in Ivante's eyes that this information was not enough for him, because he did not believe it. Then the lady had to lie that Marm had confessed his sympathy to her, and therefore wanted to run away with her. This circumstance surprised Argan so much that he forgot all his suspicions. This is how the heroine was able to keep silent about the fact that some kind of healing aroma was emanating from her. Meanwhile, the story was gaining momentum, as Yurta had already reached the head maid. As usual, the assistant walked around the Marquis's estate late at night to check the order around, and at that moment, Assel found the girl with whom Count Gertas ordered him to begin cooperation. The maid was one of those who always remained loyal to the Marquis, so she looked at the guy with suspicion. She had no desire to listen to a request from another aristocrat, even through his assistant. But Assel was so persistent that the lady could not refuse him, so she decided to at least listen. The maid had no idea that the request would concern young Rosie, who needed to be thrown out. The assistant decided to act from afar, since his master's sister did not want to leave on her own. The maid was shocked that yet another secret affair was revolving around the pink-haired girl. She had heard about Rosie many times before, although she had only recently begun to manage her affairs. At first, Richard became interested in her, and was the only one who calmly accepted this girl in the dungeon. Afterwards, Mr. Avantes provided personal protection to Rosie, although no one expected this from him. And now Count Gertas also had some designs on the timid girl who obediently served in the estate. Usually, the maid did not refuse tasks that could bring her good profit. But now, she was so loyal to Argan that she had no intention of letting down any of his servants. But the lady had no other choice, since Assel had not chosen her for nothing. The guy came to the head maid from the very beginning, not even because of her power in the estate. The assistant knew that this woman's son had been leading a dissolute lifestyle for a long time. Of course, the mother did not want to ruin her child's life, so she hid it from everyone. This is how Assel ensured that the slow persecution of young Rosie began in the estate. Meanwhile, Argan was still trying to believe that Richard had fallen in love with his maid. Ivantes imagined different versions of what happened, but he never thought about the monster's love. But the heroine's words fit perfectly into the story of Marm, dragging her away by force out of love. The lady pretended to be immensely grateful to the gentleman who had saved her from such a terrible kidnapping. Argan ended up believing the girl's insidious lie, as he did not want to talk to the monster in person. Rosie got carried away and didn't notice that she had gone overboard with feigned feelings and emotions. As a result, Ivantes gave her the task of keeping an even closer eye on the monster and gaining his trust. This time, the master was so kind that he gave the lady time to think before becoming his servant. No matter how much the miss tried to avoid it, all the Marquis's desires were reduced only to her. Argan gave Rosie one last time to make the only right decision, and the girl had no choice but to answer the gentleman with a polite smile. The next morning, Yurta was sorting through documents from early morning so as not to sit around the estate doing nothing. His affairs were going well, and only the fact that his sister continued to avoid him made the guy angry. Even the best assistant could not alleviate the anxiety and frustration of young Mr. Gertas. Assel always stayed close during difficult moments, so he noticed Yurta's confusion in time. The young man constantly felt that Rosie was different from the girl he had known all his life. The very fact that the lady stood up calmly, along with the other maids, surprised young Gertas. But the assistant was sure that such small details could easily be changed due to his surroundings. But this was not the only thing that troubled Yurta, who knew the girl with whom he lived too well. Before, Rosie had always been lazy and silent, as if she was eagerly awaiting her death, while the current lady was full of life and energy, like a completely different person. Only once in childhood did the boy see bright emotions on his sister's face, but this never happened again. All her life, the girl acted as if nothing could truly attract her attention. All she did was walk around the garden without any purpose, because that's what her strict father ordered. Her days were boring and monotonous, since the Count never hired teachers for his daughter. This gave Dylan plenty of opportunity to continue to bully her. But even when Rosie was unfairly accused of something, she seemed not to notice any injustice. Yurta personally witnessed how a girl indifferently confessed to some guilt, although the boy was sure that Dylan cruelly set up Rose for the sake of his father's recognition. Every time he had the feeling that the girl wanted to be punished herself. That's why Dylan had fun constantly making it look like Rosie had stolen something. Their father was strict with all his children and raised his daughter in the same way, even though she was not his biological father. But the lady was still not afraid to lie to the man's face, despite the fact that she was not guilty of anything. Of course, the little girl didn't even think of stealing anything, because Dylan skillfully set her up with the help of servants. But Miss still said nothing, thereby admitting guilt that was not hers. As a child, Yurta could never understand why his sister did not defend herself in such situations. Their father loved his daughter so much that in all situations he left her without severe punishment. This only made Dylan even more angry, as he was already jealous of his stepsister and everything. But Rosie was indifferent to how the situations with her false accusations ended. Even if the Count had scolded her, and not his brother, nothing would have changed for the girl. That day, Dylan finally realized that he would not be able to get justice from his father. Then, due to his emotions, he did not immediately notice that his older brother had been watching him the whole time. As soon as the boy realized that Yurta had witnessed his shame, he immediately pushed his relative away. As revenge, Yurta told his father the truth, which he still recalled with a satisfied smile. But all this did not explain to the guy why Rosie continued to watch him with hatred. As Yurta had already noticed, the current heroine had nothing in common with the real Rosie. But gradually, the girl began to dream of more and more memories of the past of the body's real owner. This is how the lady learned why Rosie from the novel decided to run away from her home in the first place. Thanks to the dreams, it became clear that Yurta was manipulating his brother from the shadows so that he would not touch his sister. Miss did not like such possessive feelings, which could only make things worse for her. As usual, this day could not pass peacefully for the girl who performed her duties well. This time, the head maid asked the lady to help unpack the gifts for the Marquise. Rosie had enough to do as it was, so she couldn't tear herself apart with this activity as well. But the woman didn't care about the maid's problems, because she was only distributing responsibilities. No matter how the lady denied it by saying that she still needed to feed the monster, it didn't help. The maid stuck to her guns and continued to insist that Rosie help with the gifts. As a result, the heroine had no other choice but to obediently complete one more task. However, the unpleasant feeling did not leave the lady, although initially everything seemed in order. She immediately recognized the maid who had recently brought her orders from the head maid. The girl's name was Rena, and she usually worked little, since the boss gave tasks to others. So the life of this servant was simple and uncomplicated, for which some hated her. Rosie didn't know what to expect from an assistant she had heard little about before. It turned out that this girl was against it, since she immediately reminded the heroine of the situation with Marie. Rosie had never encountered such direct aggression before, so she was not prepared for it. No matter how hard the heroine tried to prove that she was not to blame for Marie's expulsion, the girl did not believe her. Rena remembered well the words of that maid, who blamed the pink-haired lady for everything. From the very beginning, Miss suspected that this gift task would not be so easy. She was no longer getting along with Rena, even before she had even begun to unpack the huge number of boxes. The maid turned out to be so evil that she forced the heroine to apologize for her behavior. So soon the lady resorted to manipulation that the Marquise would be angry if they were late. Only this argument had an effect on the assistant, who tried not to catch the gentleman's eye. That's why the girl returned to work, instead of further humiliating the maid. Along the way, the heroine tried not to remember that Rena had taken the lightest boxes with her. She had no reason to quarrel with a servant who was so close to the maid. Until now, Rosie had found it suspicious that she had suddenly been given an extra task. That's why she tried to use flattery to gain the girl's good favor. In the end, Rena really did change her anger to mercy, since she always loved beautiful compliments, so the heroine's mission went without incident. But she was very late to the dungeon. As the girl expected, Richard was already tired of waiting for her, because he was used to seeing the maid at a certain time. Rosie tried to ignore the feeling of guilt, because she was the only one caring about this guy now. Marm was no longer embarrassed to act as if he was truly head over heels in love with the sweet maid. Each time the girl had a hard time moving away from the guy, because she didn't need his feelings. The fact that the magician missed her so much told the lady that her problems were not over for today. Although Richard had been behaving well lately, Miss was not deceived by his good looks. Gradually, the wizard coaxed the girl into conversation, giving her the opportunity to speak out. Rosie herself didn't notice how much she needed communication, even if it was with a captured magician. The guy had become too suspicious lately, so he didn't like the lady's new job. But the girl herself saw nothing wrong with helping with the carrying of the jewelry. Although Richard could not help the girl in any way, he did not forget to console her during their meetings. Only after talking with the magician did the lady realize that the maid's behavior was strange from the outside as well. Even in his deep thought, the guy managed to remain handsome, which pleasantly pleased the girl. So she put aside for a while the thought that some kind of catch might await her, and it was very much in vain, because that very evening, Rena secretly entered the heroine's room. The maid had a simple task that she was going to complete as quickly as possible. The maid ordered her to hide one of the jewels in Rosie's clothes and thereby frame the lady. The assistant had little time, but she made it before the heroine returned, which she was glad about. Immediately after this, she happily reported her success to the maid because she wanted to receive a reward. Rena always knew how to hide things in such a way that the owner would not immediately notice that something had been planted on him. However, when searching Rosie's room, it will quickly become clear that these jewels did not belong to her. Although shame did not cease to torment the maid, for the sake of her son, she was ready to endure a lot. In fact, it was in Renee's interests to kick Rosie out, as she was closely connected to the treacherous Marie, so the maid only pretended to succumb to the compliments of the girl she hated. Deep down, Rena was eagerly awaiting the moment when she could take it out on the poor lady. None of them suspected that Rosie and Emily had already found the planted jewel. Before leaving for the dungeon, the heroine spoke with the maids to learn more about Renee, after which she asked her friend to keep an eye on her room, and this turned out to be very useful. Eventually, the girls discovered a conspiracy against Lady Gertas, although the girl did not know the reasons. It was clear to her that the head maid, who usually remained neutral, was somehow behind everything. The lady was sure that someone had persuaded the maid to do this, because she would not have acted on her own. But the girl was not afraid of the consequences, as she was prepared for some kind of proceedings to begin. She had just recently dreamed about Dylan setting her up as a child, and she wouldn't fall for that again. As Rosie thought, the maid came to the dungeon in the morning to accuse her of theft. She spoke so confidently that even Richard was ready to believe that the maid was guilty. Of course, Rosie hadn't stolen any jewelry, and now she had to prove her innocence. Marm was ready to take the girl's side. Although how could a man who was sitting in prison help? Lady Gertas was so confident that she would prove her case that she didn't pay any attention to the guy. He once again suggested to the girl that they run away together to a place where she would no longer have problems. But the head maid continued to shout, so the prisoner and the maid had no time to talk. Of course, Rosie had no intention of agreeing to escape, since she was already doing well. Although the guy didn't like the lady's independence, he preferred to remain silent. The maid behaved extremely predictably, because in front of everyone, she tried to accuse Rosie of stealing. But the girl steadfastly endured all the abuse, as she knew that it had nothing to do with her. She prayed that Emily hadn't spoken up too soon, as her eyes were burning with anger. Fortunately, the maid soon gave the order for a search, and the miss knew that nothing would be found in her room. So when the maids returned empty-handed, it was only the woman who found it a real surprise. She was confident that Rena had done her job well and planted the jewels. But from the very beginning, something went wrong, and Madame found it difficult to hide the confusion on her face. The heroine could hardly contain her joyful smile, because victory had never come so easily to her. Without evidence, the maid could not accuse the servant of anything, so she had to apologize. But the lady saw how insincere these words of forgiveness were, because Madame was angry. It was at this point that Emily came out and reminded everyone that Rosie wasn't the only one who carried presents. Everyone around completely forgot that Rena also participated in this task yesterday. As soon as the assistants rushed into the girl's room, the lady didn't even blink an eye from fear. She was confident that nothing would be found in her room either, since she didn't keep any jewelry there. But soon, the maids came across that very same expensive thing of the Marquise that had disappeared. No one doubted the authenticity of the jewel, because ordinary stones did not sparkle like that. It was the maid's turn to be even more surprised, because everything did not go according to her plan at all. All this time, Rena had no idea that she had fallen into the same trap that she had tried to set herself. The heroine turned out to be so cunning and smart that no one could blame her for this matter.